Most people think the biggest financial tragedy in America is that ordinary people do not earn enough. I have never believed that was the whole story. A great many people in this country earn enough to have built something by now. Not mansions, not private islands, not the vulgar fantasies that people attach to the word rich when they want to make wealth sound immoral or unreachable. I mean, something quieter and more important than that. I mean, security. I mean, margin. I mean, the right to enter later life without looking at every bill as though it were a threat. I mean, the ability to help your children without becoming their burden. I mean, the kind of financial calm that lets a man sleep because one bad month will not erase 20 years of effort. That is what most people actually want when they say they want wealth. And yet millions of perfectly decent, hardworking, intelligent people never get close to it. They work for 40 years, they wake up early, they drive in the dark, they stay late, they postpone vacations, they make sacrifices nobody sees. They sit through meetings they hate and carry stress they never describe honestly to anyone, because adulthood taught them to call private exhaustion normal. Then they reach 55 or 60 or 65 and begin doing the arithmetic with a seriousness that would have changed their entire life if it had arrived 30 years earlier. That is the tragedy. Not that people are lazy, not that they are stupid, that nobody told them the truth in time. And the truth, when you strip away all the noise, is astonishingly simple. Wealth in ordinary lives is usually not built by brilliance. It is built by compounding. And compounding is so quiet in its early years that most people do not believe in it until they have already given away the exact years that mattered most. I want to talk to you about that quiet force, not the way finance people usually do, with charts, formulas, projections, and words designed to impress people who already know the answer. I want to talk about it the way I think it should have been explained to most people in the first place, as a life problem, as a behavior problem, as a time problem, because compounding is not really a market trick. It is a way of letting small acts of discipline accumulate until they become larger than your own labor ever could have been on its own. And once you understand that, ordinary life stops looking ordinary. It starts looking full of forks in the road that most people never recognize until they are so far behind them that the roads are gone. I want you to imagine a young man getting his first real paycheck. He is 22, maybe 23. He has finally crossed that line where the world treats him not as a student, not as a boy with promise, but as an adult expected to carry himself. He works hard. He feels proud. He is tired in a new way now, but it is still a hopeful kind of tired. He believes life is opening. Then the money comes in, and with it comes a subtle and extremely dangerous thought. Now I can begin living at the level I have earned. There is nothing wild in the decision that follows. That is what makes it so expensive. He does not necessarily go to a casino. He does not blow the money on something so absurd that even he would later laugh at it. He simply begins arranging his life around the new income, a better apartment, a car less embarrassing than the old one, clothes that match the workplace, nicer dinners, a trip, better furniture, better technology. The life is not reckless. It is respectable. That respectability is what hides the danger, because every dollar he spends is not just a dollar spent. It is a dollar denied time. People do not feel the cruelty of that sentence when they are young. They cannot. Human beings do not naturally experience the future with sufficient weight. The dollar in hand feels vivid. The dollar compounded for 40 years feels theoretical. That is why so many lives get quietly bent in the wrong direction before the owner of the life even knows a major decision has been made. The culture around him helps this happen. The culture says income exists to be translated into visible proof that you are advancing. The culture says adulthood means upgrading. The culture says comfort is the proper reward of work. The culture does not say very much about what each upgrade steals. I am not here to argue for monkhood. I have no interest in self-punishment dressed up as wisdom, but I do believe in seeing trade-offs clearly. And the truth is that what you spend at 22 is not merely what you spend at 22. It is what that money would have become if time had been allowed to work on it. People have heard this before. They still do not feel it. So let me put it to you differently. A dollar spent young is not a dollar lost. It is a future interrupted. That is the first thing compounding changes in a person's life. It changes how you see the present. It teaches you that every ordinary decision contains a hidden future attached to it. Not every dinner, not every purchase, not every comfort should be rejected. That would make life inhuman. But once you understand compounding, you can never again honestly say that money spent and money invested are interchangeable experiences. They are not. One buys relief, the other buys a worker. And the worker, if you keep hiring him, eventually becomes stronger than you. That is what most people miss. They think compounding is about account balances. It is not. It is about labor escaping the prison of the present. You work once, you save once, you invest once. And then if you leave the thing alone, the work keeps going after you stopped. That is extraordinary. It is one of the few miracles available to ordinary people that does not require permission from anybody richer, smarter, or more powerful than they are. But because the miracle is slow, people despise it. What people want is drama. Compounding offers patience. What people want is visible progress. Compounding offers hidden progress. What people want is a leap. Compounding offers a slope. And that slope is so unromantic that millions of people walk right past it. I think that is one of the saddest things in modern life, not the existence of poverty. The existence of millions of people who could have been materially safer if the quiet force had been described to them honestly, while time still had a wide runway. Now I want to explain the mechanics, but not as a lecturer, as a realist. Take two people, same age, same country, same basic intelligence, same broad level of earnings across their lives. One of them begins putting away a modest amount every month at 22, not a heroic amount. Something small enough that no one at a dinner table would gasp at it. He buys broad ownership in productive businesses through a plain, low-cost market fund and leaves it there. He adds regularly. He does not try to be brilliant. He does not try to predict next quarter. He does not confuse activity with intelligence. The second person waits until 32. Same amount, same market, same discipline once he finally begins. And at the end of the long stretch, the first man can have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times what the second man ends with, depending on the exact assumptions. That sounds impossible to people who have never really sat with exponential growth. It is not impossible. It is mathematics combined with time. And I want you to notice something important here. The first man is not richer because he worked harder in every year. He is richer because he respected the value of the earliest years. That is one of compounding's cruelest and most beautiful characteristics. The years that feel least urgent are often the years with the highest invisible value. At 22, retirement feels unreal. At 22, a monthly contribution feels small. At 22, a person cannot yet emotionally grasp what 40 years of multiplication means, and precisely because he cannot grasp it. Those years are often mishandled. By the time compounding becomes emotionally real, the person is often 10 or 15 years older and wishing the younger self had understood what the older self can now see plainly. This is why I tell people that delay is not neutral. Delay is expensive. Waiting until you understand more. Waiting until you earn more. Waiting until the market calms down. Waiting until the election passes. Waiting until you feel ready. All of these sound reasonable. The future does not care how reasonable they sounded. The future only receives the arithmetic. Now I need to say something else, because starting is only half the war. The harder half is staying. People think the challenge of investing is choosing what to buy. For most ordinary people, that is not the central challenge. The central challenge is remaining loyal to a sensible plan when the world becomes loud enough to make loyalty feel stupid. Markets fall sometimes violently, and when they do, all the high principles people rehearse during calm periods suddenly become much harder to recognize in themselves. The screen goes red, news becomes theatrical. Experts who were calm last quarter become urgent now. Everyone wants to explain why this time is uniquely dangerous, uniquely structural, uniquely final. Every crisis sounds that way when it is current. That is one of the oldest patterns in finance. What matters is not whether the fear feels real. It always does. What matters is what the fear makes you do. I remember how many people were destroyed not by 2008 itself, but by what they did because 2008 frightened them. They saw their accounts shrinking. They saw banks failing. They saw a world that no longer resembled the stable one they believed had existed underneath their plans. And so they sold, they moved to cash. They told themselves they would return when the world looked safer. That is one of the most expensive promises a frightened person can make to himself. Because what usually happens next is not clarity. What happens next is hesitation. Markets begin recovering while the frightened investor is still emotionally anchored to the pain. The recovery looks suspicious, then it looks unfair, then it looks too fast. Then it looks like maybe he already missed the right point to get back in. So he waits longer. By the time he returns, if he returns at all, a large part of the gift has already been taken by people who were less governed by fear. That is why I say the real skill is not prediction. It is endurance. Endurance is rarer than intelligence in markets and more profitable. I do not say this as a man who enjoys volatility. I do not. I understand perfectly well that watching a portfolio fall is unpleasant in the deepest way. Loss is not theoretical. It is biological. Human beings are built to feel it sharply. That is why so many smart people do stupid things during market declines. The pain hijacks the plan. So what do? You do not rely on courage. Courage is too intermittent. You build a structure that protects your future from your emotions. That means automatic contributions. That means simple holdings you can actually stick with. That means a written plan you decided on while calm and can refer to while disturbed. That means maybe having someone sensible in your life who can remind you who you said you wanted to be before your nervous system started writing policy. That is not weakness. That is design. I have never admired systems that require daily heroism to function. The best systems assume the human being using them will become frightened, impatient, and impulsive at the worst possible moment. Then they build accordingly. That is wisdom. Now let us talk about complexity, because complexity is where many good intentions go to die. A great many people discover investing and decide they want more than wealth. They want mastery. They want to feel superior to the passive masses. So they read more, track more, trade more, rotate more, interpret more, explain more. They do not merely want a good outcome. They want an interesting outcome. This is understandable. It is also usually expensive. The market has a funny way of punishing people who need their intelligence to feel visible all the time. They trade, they reposition, they respond to every new piece of noise as though activity itself were value. They call it staying informed. Often it is simply a tax on peace. Some of the most effective long-term strategies in financial history are almost embarrassing in their simplicity. Own a broad piece of productive enterprise, add regularly, hold through ugliness, keep costs low, refuse to interrupt a good machine simply because you became restless. Most people know this intellectually and still cannot live it emotionally. They believe complexity must mean superiority because complexity feels effortful. But effort and return are not always married in finance. Rule number 5 in the source material says complexity is not sophistication. I would say it more bluntly. Complexity is often ego in a suit. If your goal is wealth rather than stimulation, simplicity has an advantage most people do not respect until too late. Then comes debt. And here again the world teaches people confusing lessons. There is debt that builds and debt that consumes. The world rarely bothers to separate them cleanly for ordinary people. A sensible mortgage on a home you can genuinely afford may be productive. Debt used to acquire a business with real economics may be productive. But high-interest consumer debt is a thief disguised as a tool. Credit cards in particular are one of the most efficient ways ever invented to turn an ordinary worker's future labor into a revenue stream for someone else. People underestimate the violence of high interest because it is administered monthly instead of dramatically. 20% interest does not feel like a man kicking down your door. It feels like a slowly tightening band around the future. Yet mathematically, it is one of the most punishing forces in ordinary financial life. This is why I have very little patience for the person trying to build an investment portfolio while carrying expensive revolving debt. The logic is broken. He is trying to plant a tree while feeding termites. Kill the high-interest debt. Do it without sentiment. That is not glamorous advice. It is highly effective advice. Then build the emergency fund. Again, another idea. So old people stop hearing what it really means. 3 to 6 months of expenses in liquid cash. People nod and say yes, of course, then proceed to live without it, as though it were one more optional virtue for organized people. It is not optional. The emergency fund is what keeps life from converting one unlucky event into a chain of terrible decisions. The car breaks, the roof leaks, work changes, someone gets sick without cash, the crisis spreads, debt appears, investments get sold, the plan is interrupted, shame enters, panic enters, one event becomes 6 months of damage. With cash, the event is still unwelcome, but it does not rewrite the rest of your financial architecture. That is why I think of the emergency fund not as a pile of money, but as a firewall. It protects the compounding machine from real life, and real life always comes eventually. Once you understand that, you stop treating the emergency fund as boring cash that could be doing something better. It is already doing something very important. It is defending the whole system. Now I want to talk about something subtler. why. Not the abstract why. People give in self-help books. The real why. What is the money for if the answer is vague? You will almost certainly betray the plan at some point for something shinier and more immediate. That is simply human. A person without a clear future aim is at the mercy of present appetite. Do you want independence? Do you want the right to leave bad work earlier than your parents could? Do you want to help children, parents, or causes without being hollowed out yourself? Do you want dignity in old age? Do you want the calm of knowing that your life is not one malfunction away from collapse? These are not soft questions. They are structural questions. Because once your why is clear, discipline stops feeling like random denial. It becomes loyalty to a future you actually care about. That matters more than most people realize. People think purpose is emotional frosting. It is not. Purpose is what makes the boring system bearable over long stretches. Without purpose, discipline feels like a tax. With purpose, it feels like direction. Then there is the person who feels late. There is always one, usually many, the person in his 40s or 50s who understands all this and immediately converts the understanding into regret. He sees the years behind him more vividly than the years in front of him. He thinks of what might have been. He thinks of all the dollars that could have been workers by now. He feels grief, embarrassment, anger, sometimes all three. I understand that, but I do not have much use for grief that becomes permission to remain passive. The principles still work, perhaps not with the same leisurely runway, perhaps not with the same compounding majesty available to the very young, but they still work. You still open the gap. You still start, you still stay, you still simplify, you still remove the expensive predators, you still build the fortress, you still give the future a reason to become different from the past. That is why I say progress over perfection. The person who begins late but really begins is in a stronger position than the person who understood early and delayed forever. Now let us come to the final rule. Think in decades. This is where most people fail, because modern life is hostile to long frames. Everything moves in real time. Now prices, opinions, fear, celebration, comparison. The human mind was not designed to watch wealth wiggle by the minute without wanting to intervene. But intervention is often exactly what ruins the result. The investor who becomes wealthy learns to shorten the feedback loop in behavior and lengthen the feedback loop in judgment. He contributes monthly, he behaves consistently. But he does not evaluate the worth of the plan every week. He does not ask a one-month market whether a 30-year strategy is intelligent. He does not let a nervous quarter dictate the meaning of a disciplined decade. That is what thinking in decades really means. Not in activity scale. The world wants your attention at the speed of panic. Wealth usually arrives at the speed of patience. That is why compounding changes ordinary lives so profoundly. Not because it makes people spectacular, because it makes them secure. It transforms a life built entirely on labor into a life partly carried by the stored and multiplying labor of the past. That is freedom in one of its most practical forms. Not yachts, not social media wealth, not vulgar display. The freedom to say no, the freedom to endure a setback without becoming a different person, the freedom to age without terror, the freedom to know that thousands of quiet choices, invisible to everyone else, accumulated into a kind of protection no dramatic decision could have manufactured overnight. This is what the culture misses, because the culture worships what is visible, the visible raise, the visible promotion, the visible purchase, the visible performance of having made it. Compounding is mostly invisible until it is undeniable. That is why it is so often ignored by people who later envy those who honored it. At the beginning, compounding looks weak. The first contributions feel almost laughably small relative to the dream. The early years feel emotionally underwhelming. You are doing the right thing, and the right thing is not yet flattering you. That is when most people quit. They mistake invisibility for weakness. They mistake boredom for failure. They mistake the quietness of the process for evidence that the process is not powerful. They are wrong. What looks weak at the beginning is often simply early. I have always thought the oak tree was one of the better metaphors here, though even that metaphor undersells the emotional difficulty of the first decade. You plant the acorn. Then for a long time, nothing worth boasting about happens. If you are the sort of person who needs applause each season, you will uproot the thing. If you understand time, you leave it alone and keep feeding it. One day the yard belongs to it. That is compounding, not a miracle without labor. A miracle growing out of repeated labor that was not interrupted by restlessness. So here is how I would summarize everything. Most people do not fail because they never heard of investing. They fail because they never learned to protect the gap between income and consumption, never started early enough to respect time, never built systems stronger than their own moods, never simplified enough to avoid self-inflicted friction, never killed the debt that was eating their future, never built a fortress around the plan, never clarified why the plan mattered, and never stretched their thinking far enough into the future for the ordinary arithmetic of compounding to become emotionally real. That is the real tragedy. And it is also the real opportunity. Because once you see the machine, you cannot honestly say you do not know where to begin. Begin with the gap. Begin with one contribution. Begin with one fewer leak. Begin with one clear reason. Begin with one act of respect for the future version of you. Then repeat. And repeat. And repeat until repetition becomes identity. That is how ordinary lives become financially unrecognizable from where they began. Not by one grand decision, by thousands of quiet ones. If I could leave you with one final sentence, it would be this. You do not need drama to build wealth. You need structure, patience, and enough loyalty to your future to let small disciplined acts become something larger than you can currently imagine. That is how compounding changes ordinary lives. It does not make them glamorous. It makes them free.